Welcome back to Son of Chelsea. Daniel Childs here. Hope you're doing really well on this Friday. It's the weekend. It's a bank holiday weekend in England. Hopefully the weather will be nice. And also Chelsea securing Champions League football on Sunday. We will be directly looking ahead to that game tomorrow on the show with my preview of my team selector. The biggest game, the final game of Chelsea's Premier League season, and whether they can get over the line. But I think the main talking point today is Joao Pedro. It's weird. I mentioned him yesterday, and it'd been chatted about recently that he'd be available potentially to leave Brighton this summer. But today we've got a report from Brazil directly linking Chelsea with Joao Pedro from Brighton, and there's been a lot of discourse and reaction to it. We'll go through both sides of kind of the reaction, and then obviously you guys in the comments below can give me your thoughts on whether you think this would be a good addition and one that apparently Chelsea would like to get in place before the Club World Cup. Also, just quickly, we'll talk about Trevoh Chalobah, because some lovely news about Trev today that I want to speak about. And as you know, as a signed up member of the Trevoh Chalobah fan club, obviously we have to mention his England call up. But please like, subscribe, check out all the shows on the channel and the podcast feed so far this week. We've covered the news, we've been reacting to your comments that you've been putting down on recent shows, so a lot to delve into, and as well recent match reviews if you haven't seen them already. But let's start off with Joao Pedro. This coming via Chelsea Dodgers, but via Brazilian outlet G Global earlier today. Chelsea have started negotiations with Brighton to sign Joao Pedro and has signalled an offer of £50 million. Chelsea want it done to have him for the Club World Cup. Now, you've got to talk about the reaction here, because the instant reaction, I have to say, was more negative than positive based on what I see. And I like to think that the people who I follow are kind of, they are varied. Like, they're not just one kind of view. You know, some people were a little bit more open to it, and we'll go through some of the reactions. I spoke about Pedro in yesterday's show, and I think the main thing I felt and I feel about Joao Pedro is I like him as a profile of a striker. Now, as we'll get into, it's a bit more nuanced than that in terms of the way he's been utilised at Brighton, and whether, again, you talk about profiling, you talk about identifying players and whether they are the right fit for your system, or are you going to adjust things to get the best out of that player? Chelsea have had this problem consistently in profiling and identifying players. They do one thing very well, but then we bring them in and expect them to do a completely the opposite thing, and then it doesn't work out. So there's that criticism, there's that fear. There is also just a tiredness, I think, for a couple of reasons. The first reason is it's another Brighton player. Like, do we not have a scouting department that looks beyond Brighton and someone who's been at Man City before? It doesn't surprise me. Listen, this is the way this club has operated. Paul Winstanley and Lawrence Stewart, I don't think very highly of them as sporting directors. I don't think they have a great grasp on being an elite club. I think it's just been proven time and time again. And even if Chelsea gain Champions League football, as I've kept saying, it's opening a door. It's then incumbent on those sporting directors to be good enough and competent enough to walk through that door and to sign big players. And I think it's the combination of another Brighton player with also a player who is young, who's still quite young, who's not the finished article, who again is probably going to be quite raw and needs time to develop. And we're spending upwards of maybe 50 million being reported about him. Most people will look at that and go, seriously? That's where your investment is going this summer, when actually, if you in fee, we don't know about wages, but in fee, you could add 10, 20, 30 million onto that and sign someone who's 26, 27 in the prime of their career and is probably ready to lead your attack. And that will be the main question here. The other point that people have made is Joao Pedro kind of the start of Chelsea's attacking recruitment? Is he someone that's viewed as kind of a Swiss Army knife, I think was the phrase used last summer to talk about players that would come in for Enzo Maresca, a player who could be used off the striker. However, Christopher Nkunku could have been that for Chelsea this year, and he hasn't been utilised really in that fashion at all. He's really only been used as a centre forward. So that is something as well. Just looking at his FB ref numbers here, and they do speak about a rounded player, especially more of a creative player maybe, in terms of 90% of passes attempted, progressive passes, progressive carries, successful take-ons, but in terms of touches in the attacking penalty area, in terms of non-penalty XG. Doesn't rate that highly. It's more of, it speaks about his creative attributes. And again, he's not maybe your classic number 9. I have seen numbers, and we talked about this before in comparison with Nicholas Jackson, who's not very good in the air. That I think Joao Pedro is a lot better than that at that aspect. That's undeniable. And as a frame, as a focal point, I can see a guy who could develop into that. As I say, he's still, you got to factor in, he still is a young player. He's not the finished article, but to some people that will be seen as a negative, as not a great selling point. So let's go through some of the tweets and reactions from people who I do respect. CFC Central, I think, is a great Chelsea analyst. And what I love about CFC Central is he cuts through a lot of the BS and really breaks things down. He says, like myself, I really like Joao Pedro. My major issue is the same why I didn't want us to go for Matthias Cunha. They are both 9.5s who work best with a strong centre forward. Welbeck for Brighton, Strand Larson for Wolves, or in attack that rotates between the 9 and the 10 positions. Connor Holden, another analyst here. Firstly, in isolation, I really like Pedro and think his profile is something teams are trying to add to their squads with the current tactical meta. I'm not entirely sure what that refers to. But he says, I believe he is best used just off the striker. My vision for him would be Marmoush-esque, adding a maverick who can play in between the lines, running behind link, play and get shots off. Of course, he's played a lot as a 9 in the season for Brighton and would fit in a similar way to Jackson in terms of adding someone who can drop deep to overload the midfield and receive between the lines in tight spaces. But going into a season with Pedro and Jackson striker options wouldn't be addressing a big hole in our squad, hence why I think he could be a Marmoush type signing. I think this could be a move where the likes of Nkunku and Felix obviously leave, bringing a 23-year-old talented player into the squad who can cover multiple roles and does add some needed traits. So it's not all bad. I think the concern will be is, if this is being allocated as kind of one of maybe only a couple of additions in our attack, or just generally, the fear will be this is the height of Chelsea's ambitions in the transfer window. Now, as has been consistently talked about, right, this Sunday will define, I think, the extent and the ceiling to Chelsea's potential ambitions in the transfer window. If they gain Champions League football, sure, feasibly then they could sign the likes of Victor Osimhen, who I know is being linked heavily with a move to Saudi at the moment. But will they actually go and do that? I saw other stuff today about Victor Gyökeres, but will they actually... Are they actually at all interested? They've talked about consideration, but consideration means absolutely nothing. It's so subjective. What does consideration mean? Does consideration mean it's serious consideration of like a 50-50 split between going one way or the other? Or is consideration we considered it for half a minute, but then we're just going to go back to doing what we always do? So again, I need to see it to believe it. And I'll firmly say this, whatever my personal opinions on Joao Pedro, I don't think he is the solidified number one, kind of the end of Chelsea's spending. I would not be happy to end the summer with Joao Pedro and Nicholas Jackson and that's it. Because I think if you're going to try and seriously upgrade Nicholas Jackson, you've got to try and seriously upgrade Nicholas Jackson. For me, it's not just about buying another type of Nicholas Jackson, a guy who has, I think, scored a similar number of goals in the Premier League this season, and also has been cited as potentially having some attitude issues, which, talked about for a lot of players, but I think it is relevant to bring up if you're thinking about, club culture. He's not playing for Brighton this weekend for their final game of the season. I think they're away at Spurs. So you've got to factor that in as to whether you'd want maybe that abrasive figure potentially in the dressing room, if those things are to be believed. In terms of an attitude issue. And also just, if you're going to spend 50 million, why don't you just try and spend a bit more on someone significantly better, significantly more ready to take up the mantle? How does this impact the potential pursuit of Liam Delap? Is this an alternative to Liam Delap? Is it this and Liam Delap and maybe someone else? Is this Joao Pedro and then they're looking for a wide edition, which I don't think would make most people happy. But one thing I would stress is, you consistently hear about them wanting deals done before the Club World Cup because there's this unique transfer window that's going to be opening up very soon because of the Club World Cup. There's going to kind of be 2 transfer windows this summer. The first one kind of just before the Club World Cup and the second one after. And I think Chelsea would like to get a lot of their deals done in rapid time. However, how realistic is that? There's players that have kind of got to go out the door. And also, does that mean you make good decisions? Does that mean you're targeting the right players? I think that's a huge question. So, varied opinion. My instinct is most people, even if, and I think everyone's addressed this here, either from a tactical point of view of like Joao Pedro not being the number 9 kind of big player that is going to really change and fix all of our problems. Aerially better than Jackson right now, but there is that problem where he's playing off someone. And are you going to have a system that has him play off someone? Is he kind of a rotational option for Cole Palmer as kind of that second striker, number 10? Can he be developed into that? That in itself is an issue, and is that even worth persisting with? Again, allocation of resources, allocation of signings. Is this actually a signing Chelsea desperately need in their current moment? Joao Pedro a couple of years ago, before we signed Nicholas Jackson, probably would have been a better addition, or would have been more suitable in that time when you're building up your attack, when you're going for these younger players. Right now, I think most people are kind of tired of the, tomorrow signings. They want today signings. What that means is they want players that are going to come in and instantly upgrade and be significant upgrades on what we already have. And if you're spending anything over like 50 million, for me, those players have to be significant upgrades. They can't just be much of a muchness, another flurry of inexperience into a group that doesn't need any more inexperience. So let me hear your thoughts. As I say, it's not Matt Law reporting this, it's not David Ornstein reporting this, but we know these things can snowball pretty quickly, and I think as a name, he's certainly one to consider. And I'm not down on the player. I just agree with Central there that tactically, and also just in terms of the big name striker, the one that's going to seriously lead the team forward, I'm not entirely sure Pedro is that at the moment. But Nini FC, I know, is a big fan of him. I know Seb C is a big fan of him. I know some other people who are fans of him who think that he could become that. It's not ruling out that potential and that possibility. That is a lot of pressure to put on someone, and you add in it's Brighton once again, which doesn't speak very well to our kind of amazing scouting department, apparently. The only other thing I want to speak about today is just giving flowers to Trev. It was wonderful to see the England squad announced for June's games, and Trev is one of a few Chelsea players. Levi's in there, Reece is back in the England squad, Cole Palmer's obviously in there, Noni Madueke. I think I've got everyone there who are now back in the England squad, but it is the first senior England call-up for Trevoh Chalobah. It's actually quite insane it's taken this long for Trev to get the England call-up. I thought it was going to happen during his first season when he broke through, and ironically that was when Thomas Tuchel was head coach, and it is ironic that the guy to give him the call-up is Thomas Tuchel, the guy who entrusted him so much during that first season, who has spoken today glowingly about Trev being one of our strongest centre-backs. Yes, absolutely agree with that. And it's a testament to the guy in terms of his response, in terms of his ability to keep bouncing back and to keep proving people wrong. And a justification as to why I think for many of us, he is a player that Chelsea absolutely need to be keeping a hold of. But just, a great story of just overcoming adversity and overcoming doubters time and time and time again. I think that's what makes Trev such a wonderful player. And hopefully for him, it's the beginning of him, especially under a coach that clearly likes him, cementing himself in the national team. Hopefully we will see that, and a system that he probably enjoys. If he's going to play a back three system potentially in the future, I could see Trev slotting into that, or even a back two system. That's what makes Trev a brilliant player, is we've seen him excel in a back three, a back two system, as a right back, as potentially a central defensive midfielder. That's what Cobham produces, a lot of versatile, flexible players. So wonderful for Trev. I think he deserves all the credit for that, and for a guy who the club themselves were trying to banish last summer, it's of some vindication, I think. And hopefully Trev will be there on Sunday to put in a big performance if he starts, and then of course in Roclaw, hopefully to lift another trophy if Chelsea can win the Conference League. So those are my thoughts. As I said, we'll be back tomorrow to fully preview the Nottingham Forest game, the final game of the Premier League season, the Champions League playoff. I spoke about my Substack piece. That Substack piece is now out, so you can go and read it. It's all about how big this game is compared to, say, 2003, that Liverpool playoff that was so huge for Chelsea's history, how defining this could be for a generation, and why it's so valuable for Chelsea to get into the Champions League and qualify back for Europe's top table. So go and read that, go and subscribe and follow my Substack if you have not already and want to hear and read my extensive thoughts about Chelsea. And please rate and review the pod if you're listening on Apple, Spotify. Really helps the show out, as to subscribe on YouTube, like, share, comment, all of that good stuff. Have a great weekend, bank holiday weekend if you're in the UK, and I will see you again very, very soon. All the best.